day 3 of project Fairlane 500. We have removed everything we can unbolt. Fenders, hood, trunk lid, doors, as you can see. We have actually cut the front springs just to see, well, just to get a look at the stance and take some measurements of it in what may be its final ride height. The intention, the plan, is to take masking tape and mark the floor of this where it needs to be cut based off measurements from the chassis. I took loose measurements, quick measurements yesterday while we were taking the stuff apart, and I am pleasantly surprised that this chassis seems like it's going to fit under here wonderfully. I know it's an odd combination of Explorer and 63 Fairlane, but you run what you brung, and that's what we brung. So yeah, this chassis fits wonderfully. The stock frame rails of the Fairlane are 32 inches wide, and lo and behold, between here and there is 32 inches wide exactly. So this will basically take the same place as the front subframe of the Fairlane. The rear is extremely close. The wheelbase, according to specification sheets, was only going to be 1 inch different between the two chassis. But it looks to me more like 2 when I tape measure it. So believe it or not, the Explorer is the shorter of the two, which means these rear wheels, well, I guess I'm gonna set it on, decide what looks best, but more than likely I'll have to compromise at the rear. And I don't know if there's 2 inches there. It might have to be a little bit of this in the rear and a little bit in the front. But that is the next step, is to tape this off and get an idea of what we're cutting out and how much. Still don't know whether or not I'm going to put the pan portion that I cut out back on. To get the ride height we want, this frame is definitely going to be coming up through the floor a good 3 inches. So it's going to make for an interesting floor. We knew that. That's the compromise you make for ride height. So it'll be a fun project. First time I've ever done this. Haven't seen it done, at least not in a video form anywhere. I couldn't get anybody else's tips or tricks on how they went about it, so we're just going to do it and find out. Also don't know whether or not we're going to suspend this body on the body mounts of the Explorer, or if I'm going to cut this as precisely as I can and weld this floor to that frame, so it kind of is a unibody, but just happens to have a full frame. I think that's probably what I'm going to do, because I think suspending it on rubber motor mounts is probably just going to make the body that much higher off the frame, or make the floor that much weirder to work around. So I don't think that's what I'm going to do. But first things first, mark it off. Next step will be to cut out the section that's interfering with the frame, set this entire, well, then we got to strip all the suspension out, get this thing up on stands. I believe I'm going to roll that other chassis underneath it. I know that this is completely rotten down here. Part of the reason we're not using this, trying to do anything with this, is the frame on this car is heavily rusted. The rear spring shackles are toast. So I'm going to cut this section out, leaving the radiator core support hole there. Probably take that latch out. And my hope is, after I've cut all the suspension and everything else out, we can roll the chassis in from the rear, or I should say back the chassis underneath this body. That way I don't have to lift this thing above the engine, because the engine is in the chassis already. So I'm hoping I can get the engine to come in through this hole with minimal lifting of this body, because it's heavy, and I don't have a lift here at the house. So anyway, that's the plan. That's where we're at. We'll see how far we get.